In the early 1930s, when the Disney studio had achieved worldwide success with its animated cartoons, Walt was looking beyond the horizon. He saw that shorts alone wouldn't bring in enough money to support his always growing dreams. He also recognized that as a producer of shorts, he would always be on the fringes of mainstream motion picture production. He wanted to get into feature-length theatrical films. In 1916, Walt had seen a movie based on a play by Jesse White, entitled Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film starred Marguerite Clark as Snow White and Creighton Hale as Prince Florimond, and Walt was fascinated.
First big feature pictures I'd ever seen. To me, I thought it was a perfect story.
But in the mid-1920s, when Walt first started making cartoons in Los Angeles, the medium of animation still lacked the technical sophistication to tackle a feature-length film, particularly on a subject as rich as Snow White.
Up until then, animated characters had largely been just these sort of rubbery-limbed, asexual creatures who were more or less male, but not terribly so. Until Betty Boop, there wasn't really a female character. The Minnie Mouse or the female counterparts of the various early cartoon characters were basically the male characters in high heels and a skirt and eyelashes and a few dainty gestures with the little finger.
But as years passed, Walt worked hard to close the gap. With his silly symphonies, he had not only begun to make cartoons in both color and sound, but he also encouraged his artists to push towards a greater believability of the characters, realism in movement, and greater naturalism in the setting.
They couldn't have just gone into Snow White without that kind of apprenticeship, and that the Silly Symphony series allowed Disney to push the boundaries of animation because virtually every one of them represents something new.
Walt sent his artists to classes at the Chenard Art Institute.
The first thing I did when I got a little money to experiment, I put all my artists back in school. The art schools that existed then didn't quite have enough for what we needed, so we set up our own art school. Now, we were dealing in motion, movement, and the flow of movement, the flow of things, action, reaction, all of that.
The type of artists that were coming into the studio that Walt was bringing in that could actually draw animals and human figures and had that knowledge of anatomy and so forth was very important.
Thus equipped, Walt embarked on the greatest gamble of his career, Snow White, despite the warnings of cynics that a feature-length cartoon would fail. Fortunately, he had his supporters.
But I remember that he called a meeting and had a large group over on the soundstage one evening, and he went through and told the story. And I was just spellbound by it. And then he even acted out some stuff, as I recall. And he was a great actor, wonderful, spontaneous actor. He'd be telling something and he'd say, well, say like this, and he'd get up and do the stuff.
Oh, the queen gets up here and does this, and Snow White's down here, and she's scrubbing away on this, and she's singing someday, and here comes the prince on his horse, and he just acts out every part of it spontaneously as he's giving the lines of dialogue that he's writing at the time. Kept changing the dialogue, trying to get it to fit in right with the character he was developing.
The guy thought in terms of entertainment, and that was the wonderful thing about him, and that's what I guess made us all so loyal to him, because he was doing something that was good for the public and good for all of us to work at.
And to this day, I think Snow White's the best picture we ever made, plot-wise, story-wise. And were decisions like that that made the picture. He took out the dancing above the clouds with the prince that she dreamed of. No, she's scrubbing the sidewalk outside of the palace, and someday my prince will come. And he simplified it. He simplified the action and the story turn so you could follow it.
Now comes a crucial moment. The picture's world premiere in Hollywood. Crowds flock to see an animation exhibit set up outside the theater and to enjoy Dwarfland, a miniature village with real dwarfs. When the picture opens at the famed Carthay Circle Theater, every star and executive in the movie colony turns out to pay tribute to the genius of Walt Disney.
Blasé Hollywood, accustomed to gala openings, turns out for the most spectacular of them all, the world premiere of the $1.5 million fairy tale fantasy, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Replicas from the first feature cartoon thrill thousands who turn out for a glimpse of lovely Marlene Dietrich with Doug Fairbanks Jr. and a parade of stars. Here's George Arliss, Dean of Stage and Screen, and Luella Parsons, leading Hollywood commentator. Handsome Preston Foster, one of the most popular stars with the fans. Shirley Temple is just as enthralled as are the grown-up stars and moviegoers with the Seven Fantastic Dwarfs. They amuse comical Bob Burns as much as Mickey and Minnie Mouse. From the fertile genius of a great artist comes quacking Donald Duck. Walt Disney, who created these lovable characters, brings to motion pictures a new medium for a greater art, and it looks like a snow white Christmas for all.
The picture that every newspaper and magazine critic is raving about. Hear what the usually hard-boiled reviewer of Time magazine says. Snow White is as exciting as a Western, as funny as a haywire comedy. It combines the classic idiom of folklore drama with rollicking comic strip humor. It is an authentic masterpiece. More than 250,000 paintings like these were created by Walt Disney and his staff of artists to make the most daring adventure in the history of motion pictures, with new and amazing characters. Snow White, warm, human, the lovable Seven Dwarfs. But let Walt Disney tell you about them himself.
Dwarfs' names fit their personalities. This pompous-looking individual is Doc, the self-appointed leader of the group. And this little fellow is bashful. He's secretly in love with Snow White. And this funny face is Sneezy. He has hay fever. And old Droopy Eyes is called Sleepy. And Happy here with the beaming smile. And old Sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater. And last but not least is Dopey. He's nice, but sort of silly.